I really need to give you a little bit more information about kind of where we're at as a school division in terms of digital learning. What does it look like? Who's doing what? And I know many of you are going to be teaching at middle years or senior years, so I will try and focus on some of those areas more so than the early years. But I do certainly want to give you kind of the context for digital learning in our school division, because there's so much more than just iPads in our classrooms right now. So digital learning in SJSD, and I just put together a quick little presentation in Haiku Deck, which is an app for iOS devices, so iPads. It's a free app and it's really quite slick because it's really all about the visuals. So just to give you a little bit of background information on me, my name is Andy McKiel, as your professor just mentioned, and I'm actually a graduate of the University of Winnipeg's education faculty. I did my arts program here, and graduated with my arts degree in '96, I think it was, and then took a couple years off to figure out what I was going to do with my life, because an arts degree doesn't really count anymore. And then I ended up going back into the education, the after-degree education program. So I graduated from here in 2001, spent about 6 years as a grade 4 classroom teacher in St. James School Division. And just very interested in technology. I've always been a bit of a geek, a bit of a nerd, and there were lots of ways that I was using technology with my grade 4 students, and my administrator saw that and really wanted to try and capitalize on that. So she gave me all kinds of opportunities to do some co-teaching with other teachers in our school. So I would work with the grade 5 teacher and their students, and I would help other teachers get little projects off the ground and see them through to completion. And I woke up in the middle of the night one night in my 6th year of teaching thinking, okay, like there's got to be a better way, because there's so many great things happening in our school, and I know that there's great things happening in other schools in the division, but how do we share some of that stuff, and how do we really make sure that people know about some of those, I guess, what I would call pockets of excellence that exist around the school division. So I actually, I sent an email to our divisional administrator of technology the next day saying, you know, I'd love to have a chance to meet with you. Never met the guy, his name's Rob Carnegie. Never met him before, but I thought, you know, I have to get this off my chest. So I wrote down like all these ideas. We need someone who does this and this and this and this. And there were like 9 bullets for this job description. So he actually came and sat down with me over a lunch hour in my classroom, and I pitched this idea, knowing full well that like it doesn't work that way. You don't just get to make your own job. But I got it off my chest and I forgot all about it, and I could sleep easy at night again. And a couple months later, one of my colleagues sent me an email saying, hey, did you see that new job description that they posted? And it was like verbatim what I had sort of suggested. So I applied for it, as did many other people, and 7 years ago, they hired me to do this job that I kind of created. So it's been a really interesting opportunity to work with teachers and administrators and students all across St. James School Division to look at infusing technology. And where that came from is literacy with ICT. Is that something you guys have talked about a little bit in class? Okay, seeing some nods. So literacy with ICT was, it started about 7 years ago, and it was a Department of Education initiative all about integrating technology across the curriculum. And as you're probably aware, it was supposed to be a K-12 initiative, but it really only had funding for a few years for K-8. So a lot of high school teachers sort of thought, you know, that doesn't really apply to us. We don't really need to do that. And after about 3 years, the funding dried up. So there, you know, literacy with ICT has been kind of on the back burner for the last few years. But it is still very much out there, and this year, actually just last week, they've started pulling some high school teachers together from around the province, from Winnipeg, some rural areas, and the north, to look at how literacy with ICT can kind of be made more current and really make it something that is going to meet the needs of senior years teachers. So there is still an expectation from the Department of Education that technology is being infused into the curriculum in all subject areas. It's just a matter of what does that look like. And one of the biggest limitations back when literacy with ICT came out was that it was really hard to get high school kids into computer labs, to give them access to technology. And as I'm sure you've seen in some of your practicums, it's challenging. There's only so much time in the day, there's only so much lab space. But now with the advent of things like iPads and the fact that so many of your students would be carrying mobile devices in their pockets, you don't necessarily need to get into a computer lab to do some of these things that are part of literacy with ICT. So anyway, I'm involved with all kinds of stuff. I do a lot of things in my school division. Just ignore the little notifications up there because they're not part of the presentation. And she likes a whole lot of my photos. And she does that too. When she likes photos, she'll like go through and like them all. Hopefully she's done now. So I work with lots of different boards and committees all around the province of Manitoba. SAGE, I know you guys have heard a little bit about SAGE Day, MTS's SAGE groups, Special Area Groups of Educators. MANACE is one of those SAGE groups, the Manitoba Association for Computing Educators, and I've been on the board of MANACE for like 9 years now. MADL, it's the Manitoba Association of Education Technology Leaders. Basically, every school division has 1 or 2 people who represent their school division to talk about some of these big ideas, like content filtering. What about access to YouTube for students and teachers in the classroom, or Twitter? Things like BYOD initiatives. If we want students to be able to bring their devices in and actually get connected to our divisional network, what does that look like? How do we make it happen? What are some of the opportunities and challenges? So there's a lot of different groups of people that I work with and kind of brainstorm with, and so I really have a pretty good sense of what's happening around the province of Manitoba, not just within St. James School Division. And that little screenshot is just kind of like my online business card almost. About Me, about.me, is a really neat free service where you can just make a profile page. You can actually have links to all different kinds of social networks so people can see, your blog posts or your Twitter feed, whatever else. So feel free to contact me after today if there are things I talked about that you just want to know more about. So part of my job in St. James School Division, being a curriculum coordinator for digital learning, it's really all about technology integration. And I work primarily with teachers and administrators, but it's really to meet the needs of students. So how do we infuse that technology into teaching and learning? How do we make sure that we're preparing students for kind of that uncertain future? And the catchphrase that I've heard way too often over the last decade is 21st century skills. How are we teaching 21st century skills? And I have a real problem with that catchphrase or that sort of 21st century skills tagline, because it's so vague and it's so hard to actually teach something when you don't even know what it is you're talking about. So about 2.5 years ago, a couple of my colleagues and I started saying, we really have to start calling it something else. We can't just say 21st century skills and expect teachers and students to know what we're talking about. So we have to really articulate what are those essential skills that we feel students need to know to be prepared for their own futures. So we came up with this sort of 5 C's framework. And it's not something that's like unique to our school division. In fact, literacy with ICT that I just mentioned, there's sort of 3 thrusts with literacy with ICT. One of them is creative thinking skills. So creativity is one of those. Critical thinking skills. Critical thinking is one of our 5 C's. And digital citizenship was a really big part of literacy with ICT. Citizenship is also one of our 3 C's. Those things are all very much represented on the Manitoba report card as well. So these are skills that we're really looking at in all subject areas, but they're skills that really can be addressed through different uses of technology. And the ones that we added in there, these are also some big ideas in literacy with ICT, the communication and the collaboration. And when we think about how technology is being used in our school division, really we're seeing all of these things happening. If a classroom teacher has a classroom blog and the students are doing some shared writing activities on this blog, and the teacher is using it as a means of communicating with the families, we have opportunities to do all of these things in better ways than we could ever do them before. When I started off teaching grade 4, the way that I would communicate with parents is by my classroom newsletter. And once a month I would send home the newsletter, and agendas, the students will keep track of their homework, and every once in a while you make a phone call, but the parents are always terrified of that phone call because they think their kid did something wrong. So it's, now we can communicate with parents so easily and be so transparent about the things that are happening in our classrooms. Collaboration, like it used to be the kids would do some group work in the classroom and that's how they collaborated. But now we can connect classrooms across the school and across the division and really around the world. So when you think about 21st century skills and what those are, in our school division, this is what we talked about. And we're very clear about the fact that these are the things that we think matter. Whether you're a science teacher in the early years or a math teacher in the senior years, you've got to be thinking about how you are developing some of those essential skills within your students. And even as a teacher yourself, how are you collaborating? How are you kind of modeling ethical and responsible use of technology and showing your digital citizenship? And it's not enough to just tell the students these are the things that matter, or tell the teachers these are the things that matter. It really has to be embedded into like the philosophy of your school division. And I know that that's not something that you guys can do in your current capacity. As a teacher candidate, you go into a school and you're there to learn. You can't tell them this is how you do things. But it's something that in my position, I do have that opportunity. So we've worked with our trustees, we've worked with our broader school community and divisional community to tell parents this is what matters in our schools. So we're very clear about that, and I think that really sets the tone for how technology is used in our schools. because it doesn't really matter what the tool is. It really matters what you're doing with those tools. So the tools change quite a bit. And in St. James School Division, we have access to quite a few tools. I've been in a lot of schools and a lot of divisions, and I've talked to teachers from all over the province of Manitoba, and a lot of people come to me saying, you know, you guys have it in St. James. Your teachers are so lucky because you've got this, you've got that. And I know that our situation is kind of unique. Not all teachers in all school divisions have access to the same kinds of tools that our teachers have access to. In all of our classrooms, we have smart boards. In many of our classrooms, we have document cameras, so teachers can project things using a document camera instead of an overhead projector. Computers, you know, we've had Mac laptops in a lot of our schools for a number of years now, and it's been really nice just to be able to bring the technology into the classroom when you need it. When I was a grade 4 classroom teacher, my classroom was right across the hall from the computer lab, and I loved that because nobody else really used it, so I'd take my kids over across the hall all the time. But in my 3rd year of teaching, I think it was, about almost a decade ago, we actually ripped all the computer labs out of our early years and middle year schools. So there were no more computer labs. We replaced them with a mobile cart that had like 25 MacBooks or like Apple iBooks on them when it first started. And so the teachers could sign out that cart and they could wheel the computers into their classroom when they needed them. On that cart there was a printer and there was a wireless access point, so you would have internet access. The kids could be surfing the web or doing some research. The kids could be making iMovies or whatever they wanted to do. And we found that it worked really, really well. The teachers that were signing out that cart on a regular basis, the kids that were using those computers, were doing amazing things with technology. But it wasn't enough, because we found over the few years that we were, well, I guess we did this for almost 10 years, there was an equity issue. There were a lot of teachers that were kind of like me. When I was across from the computer lab, they would use that cart all the time. Every day 1, they would have the cart for periods 1 and 2, or, you know, so they would have this kind of regular booking for the cart, and a lot of other teachers couldn't get access to the cart. So they used that as an excuse. You know, we can't use the laptops because it's too hard for our kindergarten kids. They can't log on, or, you know, I want to use the computers, but I just can't because they're already being used by somebody else. So for a long time, that's what our landscape looked like in St. James. We had these carts that we could bring in whatever, like where and when we needed them, but it wasn't something that everybody was able to use whenever they wanted to. So we knew that some things had to change. And one of the things that happened when we had those carts is that we started a teacher laptop program. Every teacher from K to 8, the people who lost the computer labs in their schools and that had access to these Apple laptops, we gave them an Apple laptop that they could use. Now, it didn't belong to them, but they were told that they could use it as their own. Take it home with you, put your own music collection on it, use it to make your own videos, store your photos. It's your computer to use. And teachers loved that. You know, there were some teachers who would kind of tuck it away in a filing cabinet and not really use it at all. But many of the teachers really became quite attached to their Apple laptops. And unfortunately, this year, things changed a little bit because we got rid of the laptops. And it really had to do with Apple changing the kinds of things that they offer. They have updated their product lines, and now they no longer make the base model MacBook that we were using in our schools and that the teachers had. So our only option would have been to replace those laptops with some MacBook Airs, which cost significantly more money. So it came to the point where we were refreshing hardware this year, and we had to think about, well, what are we going to do? And it was going to cost us way more money than we could really afford under our current budget to be able to replace all those laptops with the MacBook Airs, so we had to look at alternatives. So we'll talk more about that, but that's kind of one of the things that led us to the iPads. So the tools do change, and you know, sometimes change is hard for some people, and there's a whole lot of teachers that are really quite resentful right now that they don't have those laptops anymore because they became very accustomed to using those laptops to do things. One of the first things that really became an issue was smart boards. We have smart boards in all of our instructional spaces, so every one of our classrooms in St. James, as of last year, has a smart board installed. So every teacher has the ability to project content onto the smart board. That comes with a bit of a change in terms of how you teach. And it's something that really does require a lot of support for our teachers. We have to be able to bring teachers together and talk to teachers about instructional strategies. Now that you've got a smart board in your classroom, how are you going to use that to really engage and motivate your students? How many of you have access to a smart board in your current practicums? Okay, so a handful of you. And so you've probably seen different things that can happen. One of the biggest changes, particularly at the early years, but at all grade levels, is that it's not always the teacher at the front of the classroom teaching. There are opportunities to hand some of the control over to the students and really make your classroom that much more student-centered. That doesn't come easily for some teachers. There's a lot of teachers that have been teaching the way they teach for a while and telling them, you know, your students can go up and they can do this. They just don't buy that right away. So it takes time to really change some of those mindsets and some of those teaching philosophies. So we have smart boards in all of our classrooms, and along with the smart boards, we also have to have a classroom computer, because you need to connect the smart board to a computer. So every classroom has a nice new classroom computer. Teachers don't have the laptops anymore, but they've got a hardwired computer that they can use with their smart board. And that opens up all kinds of opportunities, because it doesn't matter what you're teaching, what subject area, what grade level, there are ways that you can bring the technology in very easily. You might have a YouTube video that you want to show just to kick off a biology lesson at high school. Or maybe at the end of a middle year science lesson, you just want to show some kind of a quick video before the students go to change classes. All kinds of things that you can be doing collaboratively when you have access to this kind of technology. And I know that we're not alone in terms of having classroom computers and even smart boards, but there's an expectation that if they're being put in the classroom, teachers are using them. So one of the things that I have to do is support teachers with the way that they use these technologies that they have access to. So it certainly is a part of the job that I have. But as I mentioned, that Apple changed their product line, and so there's no more MacBooks. And the way that we refresh our hardware in St. James is we lease our technology. Some school divisions buy technology outright. I think you were saying that you guys had bought these laptops, and sometimes the laptops sort of reach the end of their life cycle. I know one of these laptops just kind of crashed this morning when someone was using it for a few minutes. So instead of purchasing our technology and then throwing it out when we're done with it, we lease equipment. And when we do that, we tend to do things on a 3-year leasing cycle. So every 3 years, we're kind of updating and refreshing the technology. Now, I have nothing to do with that planning. That's Rob Carnegie, our Administrator of Technology, who does that in our school division. But I think he's been very thoughtful and very deliberate in terms of how he's set up some of those leasing cycles. So at the end of last year, we were approaching the end of our 3-year term, and we had to make a very important decision. What are we going to do? If we were to go to the MacBook Airs, it would cost us about an extra $200 per laptop. It was going to be a lot more money to put new laptops in all of our schools for all the students, and also the teacher laptops would have cost a lot more money. So Rob and I started talking, you know, what would our possibilities be? And we started looking at iPads as a solution, and we've been talking about this for about 1.5 years. Last year we had a few different pilot projects where we had some middle years some middle years teachers, some high school teachers, and even a couple of early years teachers piloting iPads in their classroom. In some cases it was a class set of iPads, in some cases it was like a set of 5 iPads, just to see what teachers found to be the most effective. You know, did they like the iPads in the classroom first and foremost? If they liked them, how are they using them? What kinds of opportunities are they seeing for their students? And we found that in all cases, it was very successful. The teachers that had access to the iPads loved them. The kids that were working with the iPads were creating all kinds of really interesting content showing what they know. And we heard some really interesting things. A lot of people really, you would think, you know, when you first consider the possibility that having every kid have their own iPad would probably be the strongest model, because that way, you know, they can do whatever they want. It's their device. It's very personalized. But some of those teachers who had the full set of iPads in their classroom where every kid's got their own actually said, you know what, it's kind of too much. I kind of would prefer to have one iPad for every 2 students, because that way they're forced to collaborate. They're having other conversations. They're doing things together. And I think that really makes the learning stronger. So we had all kinds of really interesting conversations with these teachers. And at the end of the day, we decided that we appreciated their feedback and their advice, and we really wanted to do that. But it became a little bit problematic, because I don't know, how many of you actually have your own iPad? Okay, so maybe 10 of you. When you have an iPad, it is a very personalized device. I've got my own iPad, and when my kids play with my iPad or use my iPad to do things, they know how to kind of navigate through the iPad. My wife knows how to use it and can use it very comfortably, but it's my iPad. It's set up with my apps and my music collection and my email accounts and my stuff. And if you have shared iPads, it changes your mindset about how that iPad is being used. So we kind of thought, specifically for the middle years, where engagement is kind of at an all-time low, there's all kinds of research. CEA, the Canadian Education Association, has published some recent research that shows some engagement data. And as you can probably imagine, in kindergarten, engagement is at an all-time high, but every year that the kids go through school, it drops and drops and drops. And by the time students get to grade 8, that engagement is so low. It's amazing just how turned off by school some kids have become. And it actually goes up a little bit in the senior years, but we thought, we really need to look at engagement. How are we engaging and motivating our students, specifically at the middle years? So when we were looking at refreshing our technology and what kind of hardware are we going to put in place, we thought, we could probably get 3 or 4 iPads for the price of 1 laptop. We could put in 3 or 4 carts of iPads instead of 1 cart of computers. How would that change that equity issue? How would that give more students access to the technology where and when they need it? So it became very clear to us that the way to move forward is to look at putting iPads in our schools. Sure, there are some limitations. Sure, there are going to be some changes to the workflow. How do we give assignments to kids and get stuff back from kids? But we felt that it was really worth that trade-off. To be able to put that much more technology in place, we could do a lot of really interesting things through the use of those iPads. So we knew that we were going to give teachers iPads. That just had to be a given because they're going to be expected to teach these things. They've got to know how they're going to work. So we gave all of our teachers iPads. And we also needed to think about how we're going to put those iPads in the school. Do we want to just do a cart like we did at the early years with computers, and teachers can book the cart and they could wheel the iPads into the classroom where and when they need them? And we thought, there were equity issues with the laptops. There's going to be equity issues with the iPads. So what if we change that model, and instead of having 30 iPads on a cart, let's put a certain number of iPads in every one of our early years classrooms. So at the early years, what we've ended up doing is, and they're not in the schools yet, but they're arriving in the schools within the next couple of weeks, every kindergarten classroom is going to get 3 iPads. So the teachers would be able to use those as like a center in the classroom. The kids would kind of rotate through centers and they would do something on iPads at one station in the room. Grade 1 to 5 classrooms, every one of our classrooms will be receiving 7 iPads. So they can use those 7 iPads in different ways. It's not a personalized device. It's not like they can log into their account on the iPad and get their stuff. It's a way that they have technology in the classroom and they'll have access to the internet, so the kids can be doing all kinds of stuff in small groups in the classroom. But the middle years, where engagement is at that all-time low, we're going with 1-to-1. So every one of our middle year students is receiving an iPad, and you've probably heard a little bit about this on the news. I know it's been in the paper a few times and it's been on TV a few times. The rollout is still happening. It's taking longer than it should for various reasons, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But it's been really interesting just kind of watching this happening. The iPads have started going out to the students, and first impressions, they kind of love them. The kinds of things that the kids can do with them, I think they're very impressed by some of the different opportunities that they have. So every student in the middle years will have their own iPad, and they'll be able to use that iPad to do all kinds of different things with. And the fact that it's not a shared device, they'll have all kinds of opportunities that our students in the early years and senior years won't have. And in the senior years, we're doing things very differently because we know that most of our kids in our high schools actually have access to their own technology. It's not necessarily an iPad, it's not necessarily an iPhone. There are a number of students that do carry smartphones with them these days, or different kinds of tablets. Some kids have Android devices, but in our senior year schools, we're really just paving the way to ensure that BYOD is a possibility. Bring your own device. So the teachers have an iPad in the classroom that could be shared amongst the students if they need to, but any senior year student who has some kind of a device that they bring to school can get access to the internet, can use their device to be able to do whatever it is they need to do. It's not all technology all the time, but students who have that technology will be able to and will be encouraged to use it. So we have found that there will be lots of opportunities, and I'll kind of talk about a few of those different opportunities, but we've also found that there's some challenges, some very big challenges. Because we're the first people doing this in our province, there's a whole lot that we have to learn. And Apple has tried to help us to the best of their ability, but there's a lot of things that Apple is learning in this process as well. So I want to talk about the opportunities, and I will show you kind of some of the stuff that's happening, but we also need to address some of those challenges. Now, one of the biggest challenges is the apps that go on these devices. The way we set them up in the first place, we don't really want to load these devices up with like 20, 30, 40 different apps that are really, really good for doing one thing each. You know, something about math flashcards, like, sure, it might be nice to use that app for a little while, but that's all you do with that app. So we really wanted to look at some of those apps that we sort of refer to as like the Swiss Army knife apps, the app that can do so many different things and can do it really, really well. So we've actually gone with a very limited set of apps that we're installing on these devices before they go out to the students or the teachers. These are most of the apps. There's a few other ones that aren't on this list, but some of the basic apps like Pages, which is a word processing app just like Microsoft Word. Keynote is a presentation app, much like PowerPoint, but those are both Apple's versions of the software. GarageBand and iMovie, just having students being able to create songs and music in different ways, creating videos to show what they know. There's so many opportunities. Book Creator is an app that allows you to publish books, publish ebooks from your device, and you can actually put them into your iBooks library and share those amongst iPads. Explain Everything is a really interesting app that really is just like a blank slate. You can add objects, you can add pictures, you could just use a stylus or your finger and write on the slide. And you can save that as videos. So you can have multiple slides and you could tell a story. You could have kids solving math problems. You can have kids doing some kind of a presentation where they've got a picture on every slide and they're referring to those slides and kind of recording their voice and just packaging the whole thing up as a movie. It takes no time to teach students how to use some of these apps, but the ways that these students can use these apps to show what they know, I think are going to be very powerful once we get more of these devices in the hands of students. Because we've got smartboards everywhere, it was decided that we would pay for the Smart Notebook app and include that on all the devices. Kind of off the record, I know the tape's still rolling, but it kind of sucks. That Smart Notebook app is nothing like Smart Notebook on the computers. It didn't get my vote to be included on the image for the iPads, but it's there anyways. And then Notability is a really interesting app that can allow you to do a lot of assessment stuff. As you're walking around the classroom, if you just want to record observations or take little pictures of student work and jot some notes down about what that student's doing well or what that student still needs to do, it's very easy just to record those observations in one place and just kind of jump between all your students in all of your classes. One thing I'll just kind of mention really, really quickly is that all of these apps are paid for apps, and we actually only pay half price for them. Apple, it took them about 2.5 years to bring this program to Canada, but they have something called a volume purchase program, and so any educational institution that is buying volume purchases of apps can actually get them for half of the ticketed price. But I mean, we still spent something like $140,000 on software for these devices. And one thing that kind of frustrates us to no end is in early September, Apple made an announcement that some of these apps, like GarageBand and iMovie, are now part of the software package you get when you purchase a brand new iPad. So we spent something like $60,000 on some of these apps that all of a sudden would have been free if we bought our iPads a couple weeks later. So, and we heard rumors that this might be happening, and so we approached Apple and said, so what's the deal with this? Is it going to happen? And they couldn't say anything. As it turned out, they did give us our money back, but little things can be very aggravating sometimes. We didn't put any free apps on the devices, but that's because at the middle years, every student has to have their own Apple ID. And there's been lots of communication with parents. Your child needs to do this, your child needs to do this. Parents would set up those Apple IDs with or for their kids. Sometimes the parents don't want to give the kids the password, so they really do kind of maintain control over that Apple ID. But if there are free apps that the students need on their devices, they can easily install apps themselves. They can put paid-for apps on the devices. They can put anything on the devices that they want. But there is that understanding that these are educational tools. They're tools that can help the students to learn, so they probably don't want to be filling it with stuff that is just for fun and entertainment. The reason we didn't include any free apps, even though there are some amazing educational free apps, is because the students can't update these apps that we put on them. So if we put on 40 different apps, if they required updates, the only way for us to update them is to sync that iPad back with that computer that set them up. So I don't know about you, those of you that have iPads, if there's that little number badge on your app store and you need to do some updates, some people like to do those updates right away. And if it's going to take you a month to be able to get those apps updated, that could be frustrating. So we didn't include any free apps. iOS 7, the newest operating system, just came out in the middle of September. Apple announced that in the second week of September, that it's coming out next week. And that really put a big hiccup in our plans. It put a big barrier in the way because we had all of these devices just about ready to go out the door. We were putting plans in place, okay, how are we going to go hand these out to students? But then all of a sudden with iOS 7, we didn't want to give these students an outdated iPad, an outdated device. So we knew that we had to do something to be able to make it current. So we had to shelve 3,200 iPads, put them all back into the boxes essentially, and as soon as iOS 7 came out on September 18th, we had to start all over again. So, I mean, there's been some media attention on, what's happening in St. James, and what about these iPads? Why don't the kids have them yet? Well, the fact that Apple did this, it kind of means that we're really starting from scratch right out of the gates, and we're now a couple weeks into the school year. So frustrating little things like that. The operating system for the iPads changes so much. Like iPads didn't even exist 3 years ago, and now we're already in the 7th generation of the software, and there's 4 iPads, and there's also an iPad mini, and like an iPad mini 2 I'm sure will be out soon. So we want to be as up-to-date as possible with the software, but it's so hard to stay on top of this stuff when it changes so quickly. Storage and charging was also a big issue. At the middle years, not so much, because the students have the opportunity, I mean, it's their iPad. They could do with it what they want. And so we like to think that kids could bring them home. Some teachers and some administrators had a lot of concerns about that. Like, no, it's not going to this kid's house because it's never going to come back. We'll never see that device again. What about theft? What about breakage? All of these things can happen. They're very real possibilities. But we know that it's really important that the student really feels like it's their device and they can do with it what they want. So parents, before the child received their iPad, had to sign off on a little form saying, yes, my child can bring their device home, or no, my child must leave their device at school. If too many of the middle year students had to leave them at school, we'd have to have a place where we could charge them overnight and have them locked in a secure place overnight. As it turns out, maybe 5% of the parents out of all of our middle year schools have said, no, my child cannot bring the device home. In most cases, kids are allowed to bring the devices home. So when they bring them back to school, the expectation is they're charged when they come back to school in the morning. And battery life, I was actually saying to your professor before we got started, it's amazing just how long the battery life lasts. It's not like you have to be plugged in. I noticed a couple of laptops in here right now. You've got to be connected to power, otherwise your laptop's going to die. With the iPad, you can easily get a full day out of intense usage. Not that kids are using them all the time. At the early years, when we've got 7 iPads in every classroom, well, what is that going to look like? There's all kinds of carts that you can buy, but the carts are almost more expensive than the iPads. So we didn't really have the money built into the budget to do that. So Rob Carnegie actually did all kinds of outsourcing and bought some little boxes and pieces of wood and did all kinds of things. And we basically built like 300 charging carts that are locked storage carts. And those will be in all of our early years classrooms. Management of these devices is something that also has to be considered. If a kid loses the device, well, how do we actually find it again? If they lock themselves out of it, how do we erase the content off of it? So there's all kinds of things that we have to be aware of. Now, as people who are going to be teachers in the next little while, you really don't have to think a lot about some of this stuff, but it's something that's got to be considered when you're doing some kind of a rollout on this scale. And the other thing is damage. Like, they're going to break. In fact, Ness Middle School, your former school, was the first middle school to receive their student iPads, and that just happened about a week and a half ago. It took several days to actually get the devices into the hands of all the kids because there's some configuration and setup that has to be done. The first weekend that the students were able to bring the devices home, Monday morning I started hearing these stories about one kid who had their iPad with the cover open, set it down on the armchair and was playing a video game on the Wii or something and went to drop their controller down and it hit the glass of the iPad and smashed iPad. So what happens? Who's responsible? What do we do about it? So we actually, as a school division, cooked up like an insurance plan, and the parents had to decide whether or not they wanted to pay this caution fee. It's a one-time fee. I think it's $20 or $25, and that way, if something does happen to the iPad that their child has, they could pay this caution fee and get a replacement iPad. We don't know how that's going to go. We're hoping that that will cover the costs, but who knows? It's still so early in the game. And again, the biggest challenge is deployment right now. We've got, I don't even know, 2,600, I think, students in the middle years in our schools, and every one of these students will be getting their device. 3 of our middle year schools have now received their devices, so it's taking way longer than we wanted it to because of iOS 7 and some other things. We're still working on getting these devices in the hands of the rest of our middle year students. But it just takes time, and it's one of the biggest challenges in making this stuff happen. Where we already have the iPads in the schools, in the classrooms, it's amazing just how easy this is for students to really gravitate to. A lot of these kids have used iPads on their own anyways. They might already have an iPad in their house. The kinds of apps that they're used to using aren't the same as the kinds of apps that we're providing for them on their iPads. But teachers are seeing so many opportunities to be able to help the students to be able to do different kinds of things in different ways. Some of the workflow issues that we were really concerned about, how do I give an assignment to my students? How do I get that assignment back from my kids? There are various ways that we can do that. Services like Edmodo, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Edmodo, but it's a social networking platform for teachers and students. And it's basically like a walled garden. It's a locked down space where you create a group with your students. Edmodo makes it really easy to be able to share all kinds of content. As a teacher, I could post a Smart Notebook lesson in there. The students can go into the Edmodo group. They could just tap on the Smart Notebook file. It'll prompt them to open it in their notebook app so they can actually complete an activity or do something. They can hand it back in electronically. So, really, sustainability, the move towards paperless, it allows us to do a lot of things very, very well. There's another app that we've paid for called Showbie. It's Showbie, and Showbie could be a free app, but to get the pro license, you can do more things with it. And it's the same kind of idea as Edmodo. You create a group for your students, and it makes it really simple just to give them an assignment. They can open up the file anywhere on their iPad. They could take a file from many of the apps on their iPad where they've created something. They could send it back to Showbie. As a teacher, you collect and mark these files. You can provide feedback to the students. So it's amazing, just the whole back and forth piece. And one of the new features in iOS 7, in fact, AirDrop, right at the very bottom. I can't see it very well, but AirDrop, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but basically it's a Bluetooth service that allows you to share files between other devices that are in close proximity. So if all of my students in my classroom have their AirDrop settings turned on, and I've got a video that I want to share with them, I could just choose the video, choose the names of all those devices, and send that file to all of those iPads. So file management is actually getting much, much easier. At first, that was the biggest limitation. Now it's actually working okay. So just last couple thoughts. It's not iPad or all iPads all the time. We had some parent meetings in the spring where we informed all the parent communities from all the schools that were going to be involved in the student one-to-one initiative. What is this actually going to look like? And I think a lot of the concerns that parents raised at that point, and even some of the comments on free press articles, if you read the online forums and you pay close attention to those comments, a lot of criticism about the fact that kids are going to forget how to read and write. Kids are not going to be able to do this. Kids are not going to be able to do that. We're making our kids dumber by, making them spend all the time in front of the screen. It's not like the kids are using their devices in every single class for every activity they do. They've got the technology where and when they need it. There's still a whole lot of teaching that's going to happen in very traditional ways, but it's giving us these newer opportunities to leverage that technology to be able to really support some of those critical, essential 21st century skills. So it's about teaching students in a digital world, like thinking about the kinds of things that students need to be able to do, and the kinds of skills that students need to be comfortable with as they move through the years. That's what this is all about, is just giving them opportunities to learn the way they learn best. So with that, I know I've kind of talked for about my 45 minutes. Do you have questions kind of based on the kinds of things that we're doing, things that you want to know more about?
So for the kid who smashed his iPad, if his parents hadn't paid the $25 fee, would they be expected to replace the iPad for him?
No. So if with that caution fee, if they pay that $25 fee, they would just be given a new iPad for their child.
But what if they hadn't? Like, what if they hadn't paid the caution fee?
If they didn't pay the caution fee, then they're on the hook. Because, I guess bottom line, the iPad is property of the school division. So if something happens, even if the iPad is in the care of the student, it belongs to the school division, and so they would have to replace that iPad on their own. I think about 98% of the parents opted in for the caution fee and have paid it. But the question becomes, and this is a 3-year thing. We've purchased this hardware for 3 years, and this happens on the first weekend. What's to stop Johnny from accidentally breaking another one over the next couple of years? So we don't really know what's going to happen with this. We're hoping there's not a whole ton of breakage, but there might be. And do we allow parents to repurchase another caution fee? Like, let's say they spend the 25 bucks to get a new iPad. Can they pay another 25 bucks and that way they're covered if something happens again? Or would it double that fee? Or what happens? So, and I know there's a couple more questions, I'll get to those right away. The other thing that we have to be aware of is that, like, the cost of the glass on the iPad is not the cost of the entire iPad. If they were to take it to the Apple store, they could get a new piece of glass for 100 bucks. Do they want to just go replace the glass on their own and hang on to that caution fee so that, you know, if something more serious happens, then they've still got that coverage? So we'll see. It's a good question. Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the iPads are personalized, do they follow the students every year?
They will have to, yeah.
Okay.
So the students, the expectation right now, and with our laptops that we had for the teachers, we collected those laptops at the end of June every year, and we would re-image them, update all the software, just kind of get everything ready for the next year, and then redistribute them to the teachers. There was 1 year that we did that where we didn't give the same laptops to the same teachers, and there was a huge uproar because some teachers take better care of their devices than others. So some of them are kind of greasy, dirty looking, and just a little bit scuffed up, whereas that teacher had a pristine laptop and they want their pristine laptop back. So at the end of June, we will have to collect the iPads again. We'll have to re-image them, just kind of get them up to date, but they will get the same iPad back. They will be able to keep it over winter break and spring break this year. So it's in the summertime, we'll collect it probably just for a week or two, just to run them through the syncing process again, but they'll keep the same device. Yeah?
I have two questions actually. For like once you get up to the middle years age, like grade 7, grade 8, you want them to start writing a lot of stuff. And with not having computers, it's really hard to type on an iPad, especially when you have to do like 2 pages.
Yeah.
Have you guys thought of how you're going to get around that?
Yes and no. And to make that matter even worse, it's iPad minis that the students have. So the keyboard is that much smaller. There are, I'm not even sure if this will work for me right now. I'm just going to get right out of my presentation for a second. Anywhere that I could just open up a note and create some kind of notes. Now this isn't an ideal situation for in class, but if I wanted to, when I'm connected to the internet, then right beside the spacebar there's actually a little microphone. So in some cases, just hitting that microphone, sometimes typing can be done just by the speech-to-text feature on the iPads. So in some cases, they could do stuff like this, where, and it's not perfect. Sometimes it makes some mistakes, but sometimes just talking to your iPad, it's a lot easier to do that than to actually plug away and type. If I'm using my iPad just to take notes during a grade 12 history class where the teacher's talking about all kinds of things, obviously I'm not going to be sitting there talking to my iPad and like recording my voice. But for some things, and even the typing itself, just the autocorrect that's built into it, sometimes like I'm still not used to that. I still kind of slow down and I watch what I type, and if I make a mistake I back up. But a lot of times if you just kind of keep on typing, it corrects the words for you. So if you miss the odd letter, it is pretty aware of the kinds of things you're trying to type. So it's not perfect, it's different. There is the possibility of having Bluetooth keyboards and different kinds of things. So parents that are concerned about that could buy their kid a $20 keyboard that they could use the traditional keyboard to be able to type notes in the iPad.
So that would be a parent's initiative then.
Yeah, the school division at this point isn't entertaining the idea of buying some of those accessories. There may be some students who that would be very beneficial for, but at this point that's not something the school division is looking at. Good question. Next one.
And in regards to smart boards, do you find that a lot of the teachers are just using them as projectors as opposed to using the full capabilities on a smart board?
Especially at the senior years at this point. I find smart boards, the way they're used in classrooms, really varies on grade levels. I find early years teachers don't use it just to take notes. Early years teachers are all about cooking up fancy little activities where they sort and categorize things, and kids pick up the marker and they do stuff. So they spend a lot of time, a lot of their own time or their prep time to be able to develop content for the students using Smart Notebook.
So I know you can lower the screen if something's small, but with the minis, the screen's so small. Are for students that need the have sight issues, is there software built in for them?
Yeah, and now I don't have it turned on my iPad, but there's a lot of accessibility features on the iPad, and one of the accessibility features is like a zoom. There's even a screen curtain you can turn on, so for students that have no sight whatsoever, you can turn off the display, so it looks like the iPad's off, but if you touch the screen, it actually speaks what you're actually touching, or it'll tell you what app, and if you double tap that app, it'll open that app. So you can use the iPad with the screen curtain on, not seeing anything, or you could turn on another accessibility feature where you could actually, I think it's like a triple tap with 2 fingers or something, and it'll blow it up to a much larger size, and then you can sort of pan around the screen. Yeah. One of the other accessibility features, which is kind of interesting, probably not so much at middle years or senior years, there's something called guided access, and that's an accessibility feature you can turn on where you essentially lock the iPad into one app. So thinking about, you know, a kindergarten class or a grade 5 classroom, if you want to have the iPads being used in a center, let's say it's a math lesson and you open up this Tangram app and the kids are just solving Tangram puzzles, you can just triple tap the home button and it leaves guided access on. So if the kids try and get out of the app to go into another app, they can't. They're like stuck within that app until you put in your passcode. So there are all kinds of management features built into the iOS and accessibility features that really do support the needs of some students more than others. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a question about funding. Like St. James-Assiniboia, they have the iPads and the smart boards and all this technology, and then some school divisions don't. Is it just a shifting of priorities, or is there different funding coming from somewhere? Like, why is it St. James that has the technology and others?
A lot of it is shifting priorities. The biggest part of it is the leadership, I would say. The superintendent of the school division makes a lot of decisions that impact every aspect of the school division. Our superintendent is keen on technology, and even when he was a classroom teacher many, many years ago, he was doing some video projects with his kids and like all kinds of things, and he saw the value of technology from day one when he was a teacher. So he really tries to support and nurture that within our schools and across our school division. So he's got ideas, and we find ways to try and bring his ideas to life. So it really does start off with the leadership and having a vision for what you want to see happening. I don't know that we spend any more money than any other school division. I think it's just a repurposing of those dollars. Leasing our laptops is cheaper than buying laptops outright. So we were able to save some money in different ways. And now, one thing that did allow us to do the smart boards, that's a little bit different. We sold one of our schools a couple of years ago. So at St. James, apparently, way before my time, because I just graduated in 2001, apparently we used to have something like 42 schools or something, and now we've got 26 schools. So I guess selling off a school brings you some money, and we were looking at how some of that money could be spent, and it was felt at that time that smart boards in every instructional space would be a worthwhile expenditure. So the laptops, it costs no more money than the ways other technologies or other school divisions put hardware into their classrooms. It's just a matter of thinking about how that's going to look. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for the opportunity just to come and chat with you this morning.